Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Deal Flow Live. This is the show where we break down all types of business transactions. And today, you might have seen, if you're looking on the actual video, that Ryan and I are coming to you, not from the studio today, but from our identical matching luxurious cabins. Ryan, I'm glad that we decided to get them designed the exact same way, square inch by square inch.
You know these builders nowadays, they're just copy pasting.
It's cookie cutter, but you know what? It's a winning design. So I'm happy with how they turned out. But we got a fun one today. We had a recent thing come up where Ryan and I were actually very excited about and invested in a potential acquisition that we would be working on together here in town. But we ended up deciding to pass on the deal because of three key things that we're going to cover in this episode. And hopefully, if you're someone who's looking into buying a business, you can kind of take away these three things and know that you should look for these in your due diligence process. This is a business that we were pretty in talks with. Ryan went so far as to meet the broker, the seller, and get some information just to pursue whether this was a good thing to go all the way with. And in pursuing that, just realized it wasn't the deal for us. So if you are someone who's thinking about buying a business, think about these three things we're going to cover to potentially look out for on deals that you're working on. And if you're someone who's thinking about selling a business in the future, try to take away why we decided to pass on this business and see if this is something that is a risk that you have in your business that someone that would be a potential buyer of it in the future might decide to pass on it because of, and try to think about how you could prevent that in the future. So Ryan, tell us a little bit about how this came to be and why we were interested in this.
Well, this came to be because what we found when we were looking into this was a very niched commercial service business that served a very strong market and was recurring. There is no possible way that you're not going to need this service if you own a commercial building. And it was one we never even thought of, but when we looked into it, very much needed, very important.
It was a service that was essentially required to be done multiple times a year.
Yeah, it's a legal thing you have to do with this service. So we looked at the price, and it was about a 2x multiple off of the SDE, and we thought, all right, it's about right. Maybe a little bit of wiggle room there. We can find something creative. So pursued it, got the information, and some of the basic stuff was that a little bit of declining revenue, some drop offs here and there, but under a certain threshold, small business, especially small business owners, they're not going to have the tightest accounting. So you always have to factor that in. You're going to have to do your own digging and due diligence, which is why we always say get an LOI. But what we ended up finding after a couple calls was that the SDE was going to be eaten away and eroded by not only the SBA, which of course we factored in beforehand and saw, okay, it was still manageable with just SBA. But with the new with just the amount of involvement that the owner is in getting to that point and getting all those certifications and time, that would take a lot. The immediate plan of giving the employees that were there raises to bring on more responsibility, that was going to eat away, because you don't realize how a couple dollars to everybody really starts to compound over the course of a year. And strictly speaking, back to the ownership aspect of it, the amount of time and effort and money to get to where the owner is and be certified to be able to do this at the level with the amount of involvement, experience and time, and quite frankly, the amount that it would be left over for me to also have to basically go back to school for a little bit. It would have been roughly from let's say 150 would have gone down to maybe 50K a year after all the bills are paid and after everything is done. So yes, we could have compounded that year over year. And said, okay, we can just keep up in the business. But at the end of the day, it wasn't really feasible for somebody outside the industry like myself and ourselves to kind of jump into that pool.
And with some true exceptions, there's definitely plenty of exceptions to this rule. But a mark of a good business acquisition, to me at least, is one where even if it is in a fairly specialized thing, you can step in as an owner with good business sense and good business experience and still run it pretty well without being highly specialized and having all these you have to have certain certifications maybe, or licenses, but without being quite as experienced in this niche. Um, I have an example in my own life now with the business that we acquired earlier this year. It operates at a very highly niched commercial service that has a lot of like different moving pieces that I still am learning most of. But my partner and I were able to step in and work on the business side of it because it had people in place that could run it. The issue with this particular business is that there weren't enough people in high enough places to be able to take that level of responsibility. So the first thing that comes to mind, if we kind of like break some of that down, and this is just a classic one for small businesses, but the owner was far too involved. So this is kind of like at the heart of the issue that we found. And there's a couple different like symptoms slash other problems that came from this. But I remember you had multiple times that you kind of tried to get information. And I think when you did finally talk to the owner, you realized he was coming off of like an entire day of being out on jobs, actively working the jobs with the team. Now, for a business like this, it's kind of a red flag and an issue if you're thinking about stepping into it, if the person selling the business is constantly doing that, because that means that theoretically to keep running the business at the same level that it was at, you're going to have to step in and do that as the new owner, as someone who's probably not qualified enough to be doing that. Right. So that right off the bat is a huge concern because this was in an industry that you didn't have a particular background in. It was just something that we saw as a really great opportunity and had really good, solid, stable demand and really sticky clients. So what are the kind of things that came off of that? So the owner involvement is kind of that first problem that we tackled. You mentioned the SDE not being quite what we thought it was. So the way that they were marketing this business is that it would have, I think, somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 a year in SDE or cash flow that was available to a new owner. But in reality, when we started to break that down and with the little tweaks that you would have to make as a new owner to even keep it running at the same level as someone who wasn't all that experienced and didn't know exactly what this other guy was doing, it was going to reduce it dramatically. Now, you expect that you're going to have to take out a loan or have some kind of debt service on a business, and that is going to reduce the cash flow that comes to you. But when you have major things that besides that you're going to have to change in order to keep it running the same way, that just starts to chip down at the actual benefit that you would be buying. And it means you're not buying much for the money that you're paying. So that means that it ends up being dramatically overpriced. And then I think the third thing that comes to mind was there's a lot of discrepancies between like things that we saw in the market, like the way that it was marketed and just how the accounting was done. And that doesn't necessarily mean there was a problem, but it just gave us a lot of pause as would-be investors because it's not a smart call to invest in something that you don't fully understand. And I think what we both realized as we started digging into things is there was stuff that just kind of didn't line up, maybe because of just like kind of some cutting corners and accounting practices or just not having enough time to make all these things happen or not knowing the right way to do them, but just some stuff that didn't quite line up for us that we said, you know what, this is just a little bit too risky. And if it, when you add all of those different factors up, it just didn't really make sense anymore.
Yeah, at the end of it, the plan was, okay, the owner leaves, business operations, management, accounting will all fall into me, hiring new people, another person to take up some of the slack, moving everything around. You're essentially just adding one more person to a business that is running on 3 people making that, which honestly, keep it lean, keep it green. But if you don't have the experience and you're not coming into the industry with it, that sets you back pretty far. And we both agree it was a good business overall. But if without the experience in the field, likely would be something that'd be pretty difficult to get over that initial hurdle because just of all the different stuff. And we found out that the SDE was actually a little bit lower than marketed because at the time, um, the other sort of business things that pull, because SDE is not just, SDE isn't always what you walk away with. SDE is, discretionary. And if you look at any sims, you'll see that SDE hits and then there's lines under it, what comes out of that before it actually hits the owner's pocket. So that also kind of just was chunking off pieces of it. And it just came to a point where it was like, it is completely unfeasible. And it would be, even with cross synergies between the other business that you work in and the possibility of, overlapping sales stuff and incentives, it just seemingly, it would have to climb out of a large hole to suffice itself.
And you don't want to buy or invest in something where you're going to have to climb out of a large hole just to make it work. Because no matter what you buy or what you invest in, there's going to be skeletons in the closet. There's going to be things that come up that you didn't expect. There's going to be problems that cost more than you thought they would cost, and things you have to pay for that you didn't expect to have to pay for that are new things or unexpected things. So if you're coming from a place where you're already going to have to crawl out of a hole to make it work, and then life happens and there's even more stuff, then all of a sudden you're putting yourself in a potentially dangerous or problematic situation. So I think when you know a good deal when you start digging in and really looking in and doing your due diligence. And I mean, you're going to always find things that aren't great or aren't perfect in a deal when you start doing that. But I think you know that it's a good deal when you start digging in and finding those things, and they're not that big of a deal. They're not things that fundamentally change whether the deal works on paper, like with the financials, and they're not things that fundamentally change how it would work from a management perspective and how you fit into the picture. And we just realized that the hurdles were too big with this one.
Yeah, it was, if he was coming in with experience, you'd be doing all right. But for the average business buyer who is probably not buying into an industry that they're experienced in, it was one where those signs and those figures where they could look like potentials might be something where you would end up in a hole within 3 to 6 months of running it. So on top of that, the one small caveat was licensing need to have a license holder, and the SBA will no longer allow owners to be license holders. And being that he was the only license holder in the business at the time, it would have been probably having to go through a hard money or a private lender at that point, and those rates would have been larger by between 4 and 22%, depending on who you're looking at.
So some tactical takeaways from what we experienced on this deal, because this was one, I mean, it probably sounds, as we're going through this stuff, it probably sounds like this, like we just immediately should have seen that this wasn't a good deal. But I don't want to undercut like how serious we were about this deal. We were very, very excited about this one. It really, really caught our attention and looked great on paper initially. Just by the way it was marketed and the way it looked, and the industry it was in was something that we had actually had our eye out for a while. But some kind of tactical takeaways for y'all to leave with if you are thinking about investing in or buying a business. One, look for whether or not the revenue and the profit is declining. I don't want to go out and say that you should never buy or invest in one with declining profit, but if it's your first one, or if you don't have business ownership experience before, I would say you probably should avoid that. I have gotten involved in one that had some issues like that before, and it wasn't my first time around the block. And the people I was partnered with, it was their 10th or 15th time around the block, so I was less worried. But if it's early on for you, I wouldn't get involved with something with declining profit or declining revenue, because if it's already struggling, it's probably going to be tough for you to really turn it around if you don't have a lot of experience. Second thing, really think about not what the SDE is marketed as, but what it would be truly with you running the business. You have to think through everything. How does it change? How does it look with you? And if you talk to any experienced private equity firm manager, this is how they think of investments. They don't think, hey, what's the cash flow on paper right now? They think, what's the cash flow in a scenario where I'm running the business with the changes that I know it need to be made for it to really get a huge return for me. That's how you have to think about it. And then the third thing is, how involved is this owner really? And you need to start, like, when you're looking at a business and you're doing due diligence, you have to start talking to the owner, especially if you're going through a broker of some kind. It's very crucial that you get some time in front of the owner very quickly and start to ask them kind of probing questions about, what does your day-to-day look like in the business? What are you doing? Like, be specific. Because if they are truly like working full time in the business to make it work, and maybe even wearing multiple different hats to make it work, those are all things that you're going to have to replace. And that can be okay, but you need to factor that into your decision and whether or not it's worth what they're asking to be paid for it.
Yeah, all very valuable points, and it goes back to what we always have said in the last couple episodes are, if you know the industry and you're okay buying a job because it's going to make you more money because you know what you can do, great, go ahead and buy a job. But if you're buying to, say, get a, be a business, to take over a business and scale it, you want a bit more meat on the bone, and you got to make sure that that amount that you're going to be taking home at the end of the day is worth getting out of bed for. If it's a lot less than what you're making now, or it's not livable, don't do it.
That's right. Now, we do this show every week or every Tuesday right around 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we break down deals, whether they're deals that we're actively working on, like this one was, deals that we've passed on before, deals that we're looking at potentially doing now or in the future. We do this every week. So tune in every week on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to catch Deal Flow Live. We also have a group for anyone who is listening to this or watching this and thinking, I'm actively working on an acquisition, or I'm looking to buy a business, or I'm interested in this. We actually have a group where we meet weekly on Wednesday nights every single week on a group call format on Google Meet. And we actively help you both find and negotiate a deal. So we've got a nice tight-knit group of people that are meeting every week to kind of pursue this plan further and further. People working on healthcare deals right now, someone working on a steel manufacturing deal in another country, someone working on a home services deal, multiple different types of industries covered, mostly across kind of your everyday boring businesses. So if that's something that you're interested in, check it out in the link in the description. That's a school community. And you can try it out for a week just to see if it's right for you, and get on one of our calls and bring whatever your plan is. And we hope to see you there. And in the meantime, keep working on deals, and we'll see you next week.